So, fools for the sake of Christ. Um, when encountering the presence of God, it's too great and too terrible, and it breaks the mind, basically. These people, the fools for the sake of Christ, the only one in the West that is memorable is Francis of Assisi. The basic story of him goes, and the Westerners can correct me if I'm wrong, is that St. Francis was from a rich northern Italian family, and or maybe central Italian family, and wanted to help the poor. So he, dressed in his, upper class clothes, went out and tried to help the poor. And the poor shirked away from him. They thought, what is this, a trick? Is he going to try to say we stole from him? So then he went out again, naked, because his clothes offended them. So he's thrown in jail, and finally they had the priest come talk to him and say, look, you can wear a monk's robe, and people would expect, or at least not be put off, by you trying to help them. So he did that. And he heard a voice saying, rebuild my church, or restore my church. And he saw a crumbling old Byzantine chapel in the distance. So he started piling stone upon stone, and by this point he gained people who were just not followers, like in the modern sense, but people who were just following around, seeing what this crazy guy did, and these kind of cool deeds that he did, kind of like fans or whatever. So that's actually how the Franciscan order started. And through rebuilding that church, restoring that church, he restored the Western Church, at least for a little while. But the fool for the sake of Christ comes from the East. So you know St. Francis is genuine because the West didn't have this concept. That's how you know it's straight from God. And there are many Eastern Orthodox that have icons of St. Francis in their homes. Now, we can't have them in our parishes. It's not allowed because he was post-schism. He was after the break. But as Theologomena goes, many Orthodox have a special devotion to St. Francis. Even many Protestants, especially among the Lutherans and the Anglicans, have a great deal of respect for Francis of Assisi. We have Basil, the Fool for Christ. We have Xenia, the Fool for Christ. There were other ones. You could point even to the Church Fathers and the Stylites as being somewhat of that. John the Hut Dweller might be one. These socially unacceptable, crazy things. He lived for 30 years in the servant's hut outside of his family's house, in such a wretched state that his family didn't recognize him until he was dying. But when Islam took over, it took a few hundred years to seep in and came through Sufism. That's how we know. It's not how we know, because there's so many indicators that Sufism is a blend of Eastern Orthodox mysticism with a lightly salting or lightly coating of Islam over it. That they arose hundreds of years later, after the Orthodox had been doing it for hundreds of years. There are those in the West, in modern day, in the Protestant world, that are called crazy for God, except what they call crazy is actually immoral, and they act immoral. Some of them talk about drunkenness, or they bark like dogs, they act drunk. There's only one entity that would want a man to bark like a dog, or to act like an animal. It's Satan. They'd want to lower man down, or to make him act intoxicated, or to act out as if he's on drugs. The fools for the sake of Christ would steal bread to give to the poor, but they wouldn't really steal it. The coins would be shoved under the kiosk tables. They would seemingly do things that were wrong, but when the people looked back upon them, they did nothing wrong and they did everything right. So the fools for the sake of Christ is a great tradition. Again, this is something that an individual must be called to, and it consumes one's life. And yes, we accept them as mentally. This is one great thing about the Orthodox world, is that even those who maybe have a mental illness still have a part in the society and are respected and are not just chased off or put in an asylum. They're at the time of their life, they're not encouraged in their, what would be seen by the outsiders as psychosis. Because remember, the Orthodox Church never chases after odd things. It's usually in retrospect, or when these people are dying, that they're seen as holy. The Basilica de Theotokos was actually now called St. Basil's Cathedral for the fool who walked around Moscow naked in the wintertime. And its root is in Paul's epistle to the Romans. He will use the foolish to shame the wise. And the foolish did shame the wise. St. Francis, a humble guy just wanting to help the poor, shamed the Catholic Church so bad, the Western Papal Catholic Church so bad, that they actually did start heartfelt reform, and the Franciscans actually, the order that he unintentionally founded actually did help bring back the spirit of Christianity into the Papal Church for a long while, because there were times when the Cistercians and the Benedictines had their own brothels and had their own armies fighting each other. So Francis and his order, through this command that he didn't understand, restore my church, and he thought it meant the chapel. But by doing that, people who followed him started to, stack stone upon stone, and thus was born the Franciscan order. And the church was able to clear out a lot of that corruption. Not all of it, but a lot of it. But where the West has one, the East has many, 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 many. Probably one of the most famous is, I forget his name, the guy with the bear. We have Basil, we have Xenia, or is it Zenobia? What is his name? Seraphim of Sarov, that's it. Peace to you. May God save Serbia, Syria, and Ireland, and please pray for the Syrians.